Hey gang, in the pantheon of ships in Star Citizen, at least those in the backlog, none is older than the Banu Merchantman. It seems like any time the question of ship development comes up or those devs become available for questions at all, the Merchantman is usually found near the top of the where's my ship list. It also seemed like it was a long ways through development before the plug was pulled and it was put on ice. So what happened? Well, let's talk about that. A couple of years back, CIG seemed to be making real headway on the Merchantman, and then production abruptly stopped. The party line, and one of the most parroted among the community, is that CIG lost 2 devs that were working on the ship, and that's why it stopped, as well as they had other ships that they wanted to prioritize. Certainly, the loss of art director Paul Jones in 2022 didn't help, and that's often brought up for the reason behind the BMM stall out, but it should be noted that vehicle art director Ben Curtis and senior vehicle designer Mark Gibson, as well as John Crew himself, are also strongly involved with the BMM's production and process, and they were still very much with CIG as of now. So it seemed like a weird choice to pull the plug on the ship that had made it so far through the production line, enough so that it was one of the highlights of CitizenCon for that year. So what happened? Well, I have some thoughts and theories here, so let's get into it. Firstly, the dream of the BMM turning into reality hit a hell of a roadblock in the form of the global pandemic. But this might, in the end, turn out to have been a good thing. The roadblock, not the pandemic. Just saying. The pandemic certainly didn't help. People were moving on to other things in their lives pretty much across the board everywhere, not just CIG, figuring out what was important for them. And I think for CIG 2020 and 2021 were kind of an opportunity to step back and catch their breath. Certainly, it seems like a lot of elements of their production and priorities seemed to shift around this time. Could it have been coincidence? Sure. But the shifting of priorities was certainly something that was very real and very evident. CR moved to the UK at the tail end of this time, and there was a strong shift to getting Squadron 42 out the door. While we're seeming to benefit from that now, or at least hopefully we will be by the end of the year, some other items on the list took the back seat, and the BMM was one of them. For a while, I theorized that the BMM was moving into production precisely because it was a Squadron 42 asset. The idea wasn't completely ridiculous, as there was mention of Banu slavers in the Vertical Slice released a couple of years earlier.
Heard the order from the Banu just came in. Higher than expected.
It's good, right?
And bad. The Navy cost us 1 job. Now there's this agent. Not sure where we're gonna make the numbers up.
We could hold off on the shipment to Gator. Use that stock for the Banu.
Gator's not gonna like that.
Gator should pay on time then.
It would make sense that a Banu Suli might even be a sneaky big bad in the shadow of the Vandal invasion. But then the Polaris jumped into the spotlight, and on the progress tracker, a Squadron 42 icon appeared next to it, meaning it was being retconned into a Squadron 42 asset, seemingly supplanting any chance the BMM had. This change also brought with it a new focus on the RSI lineup, and away from the singular Banu ship. It makes some sense. With the BMM, you get 1 ship with a possible style guide for future ships. But with the Polaris, you basically get 3 ships for the cost of 1. The BMM was more a work of art than a mass-produced vehicle, at least according to the lore. And on that note, I just remember when the first vids of the Merchantman's exterior started to drop, I got really excited. I think everyone who had been following the ship since 2014 did. And then the internals came out and I had a similar reaction. But now, looking back on it a year later, I think a lot of the elation was due to just seeing something that had only been a handful of concept images from weird angles begin to turn into something real and tangible. Finally. Granted, there are some things about those interior shots that were incredible and better than I even pictured in my head, or faithfully adapted from the concepts, but there were other areas even then that kind of had me tilting my head, like the dorsal gun chamber. or the communal living space. These were things that, yeah, might have made some sense in context of an alien race, but the original idea for the living space was to have it right on the bridge. For that matter, the Banu themselves, originally at least, were hyper specialists. The Banu Defender had a pilot seat and a gunner seat because the pilot flew and the gunner, well, gunned. The pilot wouldn't necessarily know how to work the guns because that wasn't their focus, it wasn't their specialty. The Banu had tons of quirks like that, like not having a living history. What happened before just wasn't that important to them outside of knowing how to do something. Who did it originally or for what purpose just wasn't in their vernacular or important to them. So did a big communal living space make sense? Did the massive amounts of wasted space in the gunroom temple make sense? I honestly don't know, and at a guess, CIG was just kind of tossing cool ideas at the wall on a room-by-room basis. It just didn't seem to be unified or really make all that much sense when taken as a whole. No matter what species we're talking about, space on a ship would be at a premium. You can't just throw stuff in the backyard if you run out of room. So a giant spherical gun temple? Does it really make sense? The more I've thought about it, the more it reminded me of another ship CIG rolled out a few years back, but I'll get to that in a minute. For now, it just seemed to me that there wasn't really a unifying feel to the ship like there was with at least most of the very few concept images. And granted, textures and lighting could go a long way to fixing that, to unifying everything, but not all. Really, it feels like CIG got far enough into development that someone, likely someone far up the chain, started looking at the thing or having discussions and realized that there just wasn't really that plan. That whole concept of the Banu theme as a species might not be as stable or as grounded or as well thought out as they thought when they jumped into the project. Banu don't really have history, but do they have art? Sculpture? Would some of this sculpture be in their ships? Each Banu ship is supposed to be kind of unique. Maybe there were discussions of using modularity to help tweak that. Or maybe with Paul Jones leaving, there really was just too much of the vision wrapped up inside his head. Maybe when it was handed off, the next dev in line just had no idea where to go with what they had been given. Or looked at the source material at the ship and realized that maybe they needed more info on the Banu before they could make an honest stab at it. And here I want to step in and say that the devs really poured their hearts into this ship. According to Paul Jones, they were meeting 2 times a week for months, sorting this complicated beast of a ship out. The Tree of Life design really is a good one, and I don't want to take a big steamy dump on that or the art or the thought or the process that went into it. But there does seem to be some missed opportunities. Where's the trinket room? Where's the museum-like storage chambers to show off the Suli's immense wealth and all the stuff they've procured over their time? For that matter, sure, the Banu are communal, but do they not believe in privacy at all? And I'm seriously asking here, because if they don't, that wide open living chamber makes a lot of sense. Maybe they, as a species, don't have a real sense of modesty or privacy, and pretty much everything they do in front of the Suli. So, here, look at my Banu junk, I guess. If that's the case, then it would be just one more jarring but appropriately alien thing about the ship that human owners would have to adjust to. And I'm cool with that. I'm cool with having oversized seats that make humans look like children because it is a Banu ship and not a human ship. I'm cool with the scale of the rooms and the shape of the rooms being jarring because it's a Banu ship and not a human ship. But it does seem like this break in the action might give the devs a little more time to suss things like that out. Honestly, if something like that happened, or if CIG just felt like they needed to put the ship on ice until they could hammer out some of the details, I'm good with that. And the main reason why is mostly because of this. Yeah, you probably saw this coming. SitCon 2017 was a pretty heady time for CIG. Planetech was just out and working. The game was launching a new planet or moons pretty regularly, or at least had them on the drawing board. Into that, the concept for the 600i dropped. It was a truly gorgeous concept. And then the real thing dropped into our hands. From the outside, it's arguably still one of the prettier ships in the game, although art being subjective, blah, blah, blah. You get the point. It's a pretty ship. Well, okay, I liked the low-slung landing gear better, but yeah. But then you got inside and, well, it feels like a ship that was made by a committee. While there's a unifying theme of luxury, there wasn't really a grounded central idea of what that meant. There didn't really seem to be a grasp of what luxury yachts actually look like. Mostly, it seems like that translated to large, empty spaces. I would often joke about the crew quarters having its own ballroom, for example, and the beds were just open to that space, whereas even the Drake-made Corsair had individual bedrooms for the crew, arguably more luxurious. There's a large slate wall, which is cool, but it's kind of stuffed away on the far side of a hallway. The connections throughout the ship were bizarre and maze-like, and while the captain's quarters were amazing, other parts of the ship are just sparse. They're hard to navigate and not all that great, if we're being honest. And CIG knew it too. As their shipbuilding spun up and matured, it was clear that they weren't particularly happy with the results either, and the 600i went back in the oven for a rework. Not a total rework like the Cuddy got, but a pretty heavy one. It was basically gutted and remade to the latest standards. Of course, that rework, along with the BMM, ironically, has seemed to have gone on ice as the RSI revival took over. Still, the reconcepted white box images for the thing were looking pretty good last time we saw anything. Beyond the timing of taking the ship out of the oven and putting it in the freezer, looking back on it now, the BMM might have had more in common with the original 600i. Not nearly as bad, of course, but it did seem to lack cohesiveness in the same way. It seemed to lack some direction. Some lore, maybe? So that brings us here. My guesses before were just that. They're just guesses. This is just speculation on my part. CIG isn't really talking about why they pulled the Merchantman from production, so all we really have is guesses and hearsay and kind of the little hints that they've dropped along the way. So I'd say the top of my list is that there really isn't a style guide for the Banu. We kind of have the Banu Defender's Giger-esque interior, a few disparate drawings that might as well be from different ships, and little else. I mean, the devs tried, and they really hit on some of those areas. The externals, the way the guns tuck up, that cathedral-like cargo bay, the meeting room, there's some really, really strong parts of the Merchantman that point to the beginnings of something great. In my opinion, again, it's just an opinion, there's a few things CIG could do in the intervening time before they bring the BMM out of deep freeze. And yeah, I have a gut feeling this might be a while. So first up, make a medium-sized Banu trader. A couple years back, playing with Blender, I teased out a Banu sloop idea, basically a Connie-sized Banu trader. I'm not saying CIG should adopt my idea, but something like that, something in that size range, yeah, they probably should. Just something to nail down that Banu aesthetic, that Banu interior, get the feel of the race, build up a small style guide catalog to build off of. Maybe nail down the Banu style as a personality that carries over into their ships. Starting with the BMM was always going to end in madness. Once that's settled, once CIG knows what the Banu really are and how they think, act, and build, what their themes as a species are, then they can tackle something as large and complex as the BMM, a ship that literally represents the entire species. Second, there's the little, well, okay, let's say the big matter of the Kraken Privateer. The Privateer is clearly a direct competitor to the Merchantman, also having internal shops and the ability to carry cargo. But where the BMM carries a pair of huge size 8 guns up in the nose, the privateer carries a ton of big gun turrets, giving a much better bubble of protection. And then add to that, it can carry 4 fighter escorts, and then 2 heavy fighter escorts. Or trade ships could just land directly on the ship itself, up to 6 or more at a time if you wanted to crowd the deck. Now, the Merchantman does carry more cargo by a significant degree, but the only way to get on the ship is via the docking collars or the main ramp if the ship is landed. There is a hangar, but it leads to the more sensitive crew areas, something that might make a trade captain, such as myself, carrying a bunch of cargo, a little twitchy. The hangar is really for a bandit defender, a similar long-range escort, or possibly a runabout. So how do you set the Merchantman apart from, at least on paper, clearly superior facilities that the privateer offers? Well, you're probably already hammering it away in the comments right now, the artistry. Each Banu Merchantman is a work of art. They should be pretty rare in the verse. Of course, since CIG sold them at a vastly reduced price for the better part of a decade, I'd wager the Merchantman is probably the most common ship in most people's buyback fleets outside of the starters, at least for the people with multi-ship fleets, and we're here in the days when the ship was selling for, I believe, $250 or so. So it's not going to be all that unique, at least among the players. And this being a computer game and the dev time being what it is and how big and complicated the Banu Merchantman is, how can CIG capture that artistry, that uniqueness? So here's an idea. As ideas go, this is pure pie in the sky territory, I'll admit that. But it's something to consider. What if CIG used a form of modularity to create custom Merchantmans in... Let me explain. The Banu operate in Sulis, which can be thought of as sort of a family-run corporation, almost like the mob, staffed with indentured servants. These Sulis are specialized, so one might be combat, another might be trade, another might be negotiation-based. You get the idea. The Banu are a race that pigeonhole themselves. Rather than humanity, which tries to be generalist wherever possible, the Banu are the opposite of that. So why not play off of that? You could have certain rooms in areas that don't change. So the bridge, the big gun room, which would hopefully shrink a little bit or make better use of that space, the cargo room, and probably the hangar would be part of every Merchantman, and probably the negotiation room, since that's kind of a key part of what the Banu are. But then you'd have the remaining areas, the remaining space, that fall into, say, 3 layouts. One would have smaller rooms, one would have larger rooms, maybe a third would be, I don't know, hallways or some combination of the larger and smaller rooms. Say there's somewhere between 3 and 6 rooms on each of these layouts. Each of these rooms would have 3 or so options for what they specialized in and how they were laid out. Now, when a player gets a BMM, they have to select these things through the modularity system. But here's the difference. Those selections are then baked in. They're bespoke and can never be changed for that specific BMM. The upside is that it would be rare with that many combinations for a BMM to have the exact same layout as another one. The downside is that, yeah, the player would be locked into whatever they picked originally. I don't know. It's just an idea to capture that uniqueness, that artistry. Will CIG do something like that? No chance in hell. But I do hope that in this step back, they really embrace what the Banu are and do that without resorting to the huge empty spaces equal luxury tactic that they took with the 600i. At the end of the day, the Merchantman is a giant, complicated ship without all its game loops yet. There's going to be a standard bearer for an entire alien species. So CIG taking a step back and making sure they have the time and the focus and the devs to get it right, that's fine by me. Either way, it looks like they'll have plenty of time to think about it, as do we all. And that's all I got for this one, gang. Catch you next time.